So most people associate the mill system with what you probably learned last year within European history and the Industrial Revolution as being a place of hard drudgery and sad tears. A lot of people also associated it with loose morals, as we saw, for instance, in England when the industrial rates were going up and people were moving to the cities, lots of loose morals being exercised and foundlings going up. However, the mill system established by Lowen Waldheim built a moral and effective system which created a precedent to carry forth largely until World War I. While some contest that this mill system was just a facade for hard drudgery, it is to be recognized that while there was hard work, it was accompanied by much joy. So first off, the mill system brought ideas of the Second Great Awakening and implemented that into what was currently happening in the Industrial Revolution. So first, we can look to the Lowell Offering. So the Lowell Offering was just kind of a newspaper in a sense that was produced by the mill workers at a Lowell mill. And so the mill workers were all women. In this Lowell Offering, it says that the production, or all of the articles in good faith and exclusively the productions of females employed in the mills. We reply unhesitantly and without reserve that they are the verses set to music accepted. So pretty much essentially what it's saying is that this was all written by the women and all made by them. And in the Lowell Offering there's things like poems, stories, personal accounts, some even have diary entries. What it shows though is that it took the idea of education and the ideas of from the Second Great Awakening, like morality and whatnot, and it implemented that into this system and gave the ladies an opportunity to do this. The next thing where we can see this is from a Massachusetts House document. While this was an investigation of the mill, it does show and point to the fact that there is definitely that idea of enlightenment and that idea of education and prosperity. It says the next evil is the length of time employed, not giving them time to cultivate their minds. She spoke of the high morale and intellectual character of the girls, that many were engaged as teachers in the Sunday schools, that many attended the lectures of the Lowell Institute, and she thought that if more time was allowed that more lectures would be given and more girls attended. While not all of this is positively saying, it does attest to the fact that these were smart girls, that they had lectures, they had opportunities when they were working in the mill, and that attests to the system's kind of Second Great Awakening type attitude. Next, there is a kind of a diary type entry from a mill worker, and she said that after one has worked from 10 to 14 hours at manual labor, that it can be impossible to study history, philosophy, or science, and that she might be unable to keep awake, and that her chief delight was to place her aching feet in an easy position. So this attests to that there was these many classes, but that because of hard work for her in this case, she was unable to keep up with it, which brings me to my next point of the hard drudgery. So this piece shows that she said she was unable to keep awake, so it shows that there was the hard aspects. I also have a timetable from the Lowell Mills present up on the top corner, but it basically shows that they only have like 3 days off, which is like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and there's like one spring break type thing. Other than that, the mill is constantly running except for, of course, the Sabbath. But they just ran it through and through. And there's a reference on there to bells. Another thing that was noted in a lot of these documents, and even in this picture, is there's a bell tower, and the bell was kind of the marker of the mill workers' life. The bell told them when they could eat, when they could sleep, when they could go to classes, and it was kind of the ruling deity almost, in a sense. I also have an average hours worked, which was also excerpted from the Massachusetts House document. And most, in April, they would be having usually their most strenuous work ones, which it says was 13 hours and 31 minutes. And then kind of the lightest workload, I guess, would be in January with 11 hours and 24 minutes. Either way, though, everything is pretty much showing that they're putting in heavy amounts and hours of work, and that, as noted in other documents, it could be seen as strenuous. However, at the end of the day, it was a mill, and they wanted to crank things out, and there was not heavily regulated laws on what they could work their workers. There's also a document from a Mr. Brownson, which was published in a newspaper, and it says that while they were said to be healthy, contented, and happy, the mills wore out their health, spirits, and morals, and when they can toil no longer, they go home to die. She has worked in a factory is almost enough to explicit to infamy the most worthy and virtuous girl. This was kind of a newspaper saying that these have the facade of being awesome and empowering females, but really it's just hard drudgery. However, I think a really neat thing was that in the Lowell offering, in one of them, there was a response by one of the mill worker girls, and I'll go on to that later, but that was kind of fiery. But because of the system they were able to cheaply manufacture, one of the reasons why they employed females was because they could pay them a lot less, and because they boarded them, they did have access to them pretty much at all hours of the day. I have a picture here of one of the factory setups, I guess, and most of the buildings on the campus, I guess, are boarding houses for the females. It also established a system that continued to be used, as I mentioned previously, up until World War I. An example of this, and when kind of it finally came to an end, would be with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, because after this we saw a lot of regulations being put onto this industry. So the Triangle Factory Shirtwaist fire there was a big factory block in New York, and it was 1911, and people were laboring away on their floors, but all of the doors would be locked, and the stairwells would be locked, and there'd be small doors just to make sure that people stayed working, and it was kind of sometimes like a little bit reminiscent of slavery, which was also referenced in some articles. But what happened was something in the linen bin caught fire, they're not entirely sure, but it ended up killing 141 people, and because of this there was lots of measures put into place. So I have a newspaper article from the Democratic Banner that essentially says what they fixed, and because of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, we have a lot of safety regulations now, like having clear exits, having escape ways, making sure that we don't have doors locked from the outside. And so this kind of showed that after this there was finally change to the mill system. So overall the mill system implemented by Lowell and Waltham incorporated lots of great ideas, still was a mill, but had a continuing effect that really influenced American industrialization, because it was a pattern that was followed largely up until World War I, but even sometimes can be seen in parts of our U.S. today. Like if you go to Los Angeles, there still are some mills that are running with a lot of migrant women, but they still pay women, and they pay them very lowly and kind of have living conditions similar to this. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Was this an effective tactic for the economy?
Yes, it was, because what happened is because they didn't pay the women as much, they could sell the products for cheaper. Additionally, because they took a lot of women from the countryside, it created more jobs in the countryside for like hired hands and whatnot, which kind of empowered a middle class and also empowered even lower wage workers that were male. So it created a good economic system. Any other questions?
So as awful as this is, if the mill system was never there, would we be where we are now?
Probably not. This also kind of streamlined the American fabric milling system, otherwise we would still be getting a lot of imports from England. And this kind of is a system that China eventually took and used, because like if you go to Chinese factories today, they will usually use a lot of low-paid women, but they do have like educational classes, and they are sometimes housed in dormitories.
It's actually one of the first big